I'm not ashamed to talk about cancer.
Yeah.
I'm not embarrassed by it. Some people, you have to cope with it in your own way. And I get involved. I've involved the Cancer Society. I trained to peer-to-peer. I used to drive people to and from, chemotherapy. So I was very much involved. But I mean, it was just to fill up my time.
Yeah, I think I remember my father had developed prostate cancer. I can't actually remember when now. And I remember at the time when he was going to his is it the radiotherapy?
Chemotherapy, possibly.
Chemotherapy is it the radiotherapy?
Radiotherapy for about 5 weeks.
Radiotherapy every day,
for about 5 weeks,
yeah,
type of thing.
That's hard going every day. And I remember thinking, there was something in me felt I'd love to be able to do that. There must be some people who don't drive or who are on their own, or how do they?
Yeah, my wife is unfortunately going through it at the moment. She's going every day. So, but she's driving herself. That's.
I mean, the Cancer Society aren't able to provide drivers for radiotherapy because it's so intensive, but they do provide drivers for people going to chemo and they have 200 or 300 drivers. I was one of those for about 5 years. You get to pick up somebody once. I used to meet people. You never knew. I never knew what type of treatment they were on, and I didn't care.
Yeah.
It was just providing, as you said, a service.
Yeah. But you can imagine the difference, I can anyway, that, if I put myself in the shoes of somebody who is suffering from cancer and has to get to the radiotherapy and doesn't drive or is tired or whatever, that, that you arrive at the door.
Yeah.
Makes some difference to them.
I mean, I remember, I don't know whether I told you, I had a lady that was picking up in Dunshaughlin, and I picked her up 7 o'clock. Her husband was bedridden, and she had to get up at 5:30 to get ready for somebody to come in. I was on the way to the mater, and she said, "Tom, I'm sorry," she says, "I have a bit of a difficulty." I says, "Okay, what?" She says, "I'm not really for chemotherapy today." She says, "I have pleurisy and I have to get out to St. Vincent's." But she says, "I'd never get from Dunshaughlin to St. Vincent's." So she says, "I want you to drop me at the mater and I'll get a taxi out to Vincent's." And I said, "No bloody way." I said, "I drove her out to Vincent's." But it brings home to you, as you said, the difficulty of somebody
to have the support.
To have the support, who couldn't drive, was to get from Dunshaughlin to Vincent's and back, and at the same time have somebody look after her husband. I mean, your heart would cry for it. I mean, and you say, it's only just an example of what you're saying, the difficulty. You don't realise the difficulties that people are having.
Yeah. I'm going to just keep rolling here.
Sorry.
No, I'm going to just keep going. So the thing is now that's, obviously something that you, Tom, have in you, that you can, you are retired, as you said, and you also have this impulse that you want to do it. But that's different to, being a patient advocate. So what is a patient advocate in this context? You're sitting here with Liam Gallagher, who is a cancer researcher in the Conway Institute in UCD, and there's a relationship here between the two of you, and your role in it is to be a patient advocate. What is that? The
patient advocate is being prepared to share your experience, whatever experience in either diagnosis or treatment or post-treatment, where you're prepared to contribute your life experience to researchers, some of them who are the age of your son or daughter, who would have no understanding of the life journey that you have done, or that, and you feel that you can, you can share your view with them, to say, look, I'm a patient, I want to see improvement in the diagnostic treatment. You are the key to improving it. You mightn't realise it, but it's to come through you, and I can share you my story of being diagnosed. In most cases, a lot of people who are diagnosed with cancer have no symptoms. Like, they go into the doctor for something, a pain in the back or a pain in the ear or something, and they send you for a test. With my thing, the doctor sent me for a blood test. I didn't know what it was for. He came back, he said to me, "Your blood test has shown elevated. I want you to see a urologist." I went along to the urologist, not knowing what I was going to do. The urologist sort of said to me, "Look, you know why you're here." So that is something that a lot of my young children would have no experience, wouldn't understand. That's how oftentimes cancers are actually picked up, And then when you're told, I mean, people will tell you, when you go in and you're sitting, normally the doctor sort of says, when you're coming back for the result of the test, will you bring a partner? Now, in most cases you say, what the hell is that? But then when you go in and you sit through the thing and he brings you through, he says, by the way, he says, this test is indicate you have cancer. After that, you hear nothing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely hear nothing. And in fact, anybody who's been diagnosed will tell you that. So that's why they've always encouraged to do it. So having that, by sharing that to people, you feel that you're giving them an insight into the process of diagnosis and treatment. And almost you feel by encouraging them to do what they can, and anything you can do, even when they're writing grant applications, sometimes they want to be able to sort of, you say, look, can you express it in simple English? I mean, I'm an accountant. So, I mean, I talk about creditors, debtors, and you'll say, what in the name of God is that? And to a large degree, the same thing applies to science. There's terminology that isn't familiar to non-scientists. And you try and help people to explain in layman's term. And in most cases, they have great ideas, but when you read it first, you say, well, what does it mean? What's the impact of this research? How is it going to benefit me or benefit somebody else? And they know the story, but it's a question to get them to express it in simple English. And in most cases, when you go to these presentations, I'm blown away with how they eventually express it, having worked with people in patient voice to help them to simplify it and to explain it in layman's terms.
Amazing. So real outcome that your work or your
and that's what I feel in patient voice. We have each year we have a new group of researchers who come in, who meet the patients, people with breast cancer, with prostate cancer, with other cancers, and we're prepared to share the story, we're prepared to help them, and each year those researchers get on a career path, and then in the next year or two there's a new group of researchers that you almost have to repeat the exercise with. But I don't mind, I understand it. And I mean, the way I look at it is, if we have researchers who understand cancer from the patient's point of view, it gives them an extra understanding and almost motivation to say, I'm going to do this.
Makes it real, or gives it like Liam, from your point of view then, you study the sort of molecular tissue effects of cancer in cells, and it's very sort of focused, almost like down a microscope.
Yeah.
And how does the fact that Tom is a patient advocate, how does that impact on your work or the work in your research group or in other people's research groups? What's the actual sort of impact?
Yeah, I think it's a good point that a lot of researchers have classically a tunnel vision approach. They have to apply a very focused approach to actually get to the end, and sometimes they don't see what's on the periphery. And for example, you might look down a test tube or down a microscope on cells, and forget that these cells are coming from a person, and that person had a family, and there's a wider context there. And from conversations with Tom, but also you know yourself as family experiences of cancer, that there's obviously the physical effects of cancer, but there's also, just as important, as the kind of the mental side of cancer in terms of how to deal with it, the psychosocial aspects. And for example, fortunately, due to advances in cancer research, we've had this huge explosion of people who are kind of surviving through their cancer treatment for a long period of time, and hopefully they'll never experience cancer again.
Which is amazing.
It is amazing, but also presents challenges, you know what I mean? Because ultimately they're often left sometimes with the after effects, lifelong after effects of their treatment. So for example, with breast cancer, if they've had to go through major surgery, or radical prostatectomy in the case of prostate cancer, where men become potentially impotent and have urinary incontinence. And these might sound, so what? Do you know what I mean? But for some people, it is
the quality of life. It's amazing. I mean, one of the guys that I know, I mean, he talks about, I only have to use 2 pads a day. And I'm sort of saying, oh my God, that's somebody who's in his 70s. Now, some of them might be even in their 40s or 50s, and to go through life having to use pads as part of the after effect of surgery. I mean, it's one of the risks.
I think you're right. I think people don't like. There's a kind of embarrassment or something. People are embarrassed about it or don't like talking about it, or so it's amazing that as a patient, a former patient, that you have that, you know, and it must be brilliant, Liam, to have people that you can actually find out, okay, so well, I'm interested in how to cure this blooming thing, you know, or what is it that actually is going wrong that's allowing it to grow and to cause all these problems, and how is it that it actually can migrate, and you know, all the sort of molecular stuff. But it's
I suppose a specific example. So obviously Tom is you know, undergoes active surveillance in the context of trying to determine, you know, going through regular biopsies to determine whether the cancer is advanced or not. And I suppose what we work on is trying to actually develop tests that can actually be used to predict that event. And okay, it's all well and good at developing a test with a certain degree of accuracy, but it's not applied on its own. There's a conversation that needs to be had between the urologist, the patient, but also how good the test is. So it's this kind of interplay between the two that's very important. And also people have different risk appetites. So for example, you could have a test that, you know, near perfect, but some people would say, look, I just want to get my prostate removed because I want no chance of the tumor coming back. I'll deal with all of the side effects. And that's their decision. So ultimately, it's important as cancer researchers that we actually acknowledge that even if we develop something, it may not be fit for purpose for everybody. And I suppose that's where we focus on, is this kind of what's called precision medicine or personalized medicine. It's kind of tailoring approaches to the disease. But again, disease doesn't exist in this vacuum. There's a person behind that disease, and they also are part. They're obviously more important in terms of that decision as well, because people have a different approach to dealing with disease. And say, for example, again in the case of early stage breast cancer, which I know pretty well, classically, you know, patients with early stage breast cancer would have been given chemotherapy to potentially benefit a very small proportion of patients. And so to benefit those small proportion, vast numbers of patients were given chemotherapy with all of their horrendous side effects, but we didn't have the tools at our arsenal to actually differentiate who really benefited, who really needed it. And now we have those tools, which is great, but they're not perfect. And I suppose what we try to do is develop improved versions of those tools, but no matter how good that tool is, it's still down to the patient's decision in terms of the application of that tool. In consultation, whoever their clinician is. So again, that's important as a cancer researcher, that we know that and we understand that, so we can actually tailor our approach to dealing with that kind of, I suppose, that human interaction.
Yeah, so it's kind of amazing, because obviously as a researcher in a lab, you know, as I said, you know, there's this thing of being very focused on the problem in hand, and you kind of know that it's affecting, in an abstract way, you know, it's a disease and it's affecting people, and but it has to have a difference. It has to have an impact that you actually are face to face with a person who has suffered from it and who knows what it's like and who has been tested for it and who has been treated for it. And it has to make it more, I mean, obviously, you know, I don't think there's a family in the country that hasn't been affected by cancer, so probably everybody actually knows somebody who's suffering from it. I mean, my father died of prostate cancer that eventually spread to the bone.
But I think what it does is it recalibrates it. Like, I've been working in cancer research for over 30 years. And I've had some, you know, say over the last, 4 years, I've had more direct experiences of family members affected by cancer. But again, like, as you said, like, the vast majority of people in some way have been affected by cancer during their lifetime, in more ways than others, by some people. But ultimately, I suppose what it does, you know, it just refocuses the mind about what you're actually doing. Because often, you know, like, ultimately, yes, cancer research in a lot of cases, unless you're directly patient-facing, is somewhat abstract in terms of its approach. You're dealing with kind of abstract concepts and kind of, you know, replicas of the disease, but they're not actually the disease. So it actually allows you to stand back and say, okay, you know, is this appropriate to address that question or not? And actually confront it a bit. And even someone who's been working in cancer research for 30 years, it's very important that I do that on a continuous basis. But I think, as what Tom has indicated, it's great that we have, you know, when I was kind of, I suppose, training in cancer research, I certainly wouldn't have considered, or I wasn't really exposed to patients during my early research career. I think it's fantastic with the patient voice in cancer research that you have this emerging group of cancer researchers who are kind of, it's almost inbuilt from the start. And that's what's amazing. It's this kind of interaction that's happening, and it's actually benefiting them. Not only their research, but their ability to communicate that research, because that's part of it as well. It's like, you know, I suppose what the COVID pandemic has shown is that research is important. People have become more familiar with the terminology of PCR and antigens, which they're the terminology that we work with on our day-to-day basis, but in cancer. But now the general public is like an expert in that area. Yeah. But at least now you can have those conversations with people and say, like, actually, what am I doing in the lab? Like even the concept of vaccination, the vaccination techniques which are used against COVID were derived from cancer research. Okay. So it was an RNA vaccine. BioNTech were actually developing cancer vaccines. What's great is now they've shown that it works in humans for infectious disease. Now that's greatly accelerated its effort now in treatment of cancer. So that's now probably the next wave of revolution is vaccination against cancer.
Wow.
I mean, one of the things that arises in this, especially in relation to prostate cancer, is with low-grade prostate cancer, patients are given options. In other words, the urologist will say, you have low-grade Gleason 6, you have the option of going on active surveillance, which is monitoring everything. You have the option of going on for surgery, or you have the option of going for radiotherapy. And most patients don't understand, and I didn't understand, why you have a choice. Now, it's not the same with all cancers, but it puts a lot of dilemma on men as, what should I choose? What's the most suitable for me? So in a lot of cases now, urologists will it's a shared decision. They will tell you the outline. I mean, the urologist that I went to initially said, look, at 80% of men at 80 will have prostate cancer. Full stop. You have a low grade. He says it may never become aggressive. You may never need any treatment. And in that situation, when he said, look, if you go for surgery, there's 20% of people who go for surgery will end up with incontinence. And I'm saying, do I really want that? And the answer is no. And that's why I went for the thing. But it's a question, some people have a lot of difficulty. There was a gentleman that rang me. I'm one of these sort of peer-to-peer supporters on Irish Cancer Society. A guy rang me. The help desk put them in contact with people who are on active surveillance, on surgery, and he talked to me, and I said, look, this is my story. You have to decide what you want, and you have to be happy with it in your family. And I just told him, I said, now talk to somebody who's had surgery, somebody who's had radiotherapy. And he talked to them, and he came back to me, he says, Tom, I've decided to go on active surveillance. I said, fine. About a year later, I got a phone call on a January Sunday night. Hello, Tom, how are you? I'm going in for surgery tomorrow into Vincent's. I said, oh, great. I said, you don't mind me asking, why did you change your mind? He says, to be quite honest, he says, my wife and children were worried about my cancer. And he said the simplest thing was to get the surgery and stop them worrying. Now, I didn't say to him, you're taking a risk of incontinence and erectile dysfunction, but I didn't say that. All I said to him, I said, look, the best of luck, and if you need any support afterwards, we can put you in contact with something. But it puts into context the choices,
Lads, just to finish, can I ask you both to just talk briefly about these objects we have in front of us here? Maybe just let's just talk about the personal ones at the moment, the ones that you had in the photograph. So, Tom, can you explain to us what you were holding in the photograph?
The one I'm holding in the photograph is a calculator, a euro calculator. I mean, I spent, I suppose, 37 years as an accountant. So a calculator, my life has been built around calculators. And I'm a figures man. I mean, anybody in patient voice, when they're talking about something, somebody will talk about a budget. Tom Hope puts up his hand and says, I'm the budget. And in fact, that is my life. It has driven my life. It's no longer my life. But in fact, it impacts on the other items that I have there. Yeah. I'm a treasurer of Men Against Cancer. I'm treasurer against a youth orchestra that my wife is involved. I'm treasurer of another business that my wife is. I'm a numbers man. So I've never been able to get away from it, even though it's not the primary thing of my life. It's literally, I've been around it all the time. So really,
it speaks a lot about you. What about Liam? What about this?
Yeah, oh sorry. So this is a card that my oldest daughter is 23 at the moment. So I was asked, I don't know, about 15 years ago to go into her school for a science week to do like a science demo. And I don't know, she was probably 7 or 8, and I don't know, did the usual thing of doing the liquid nitrogen experiments, etc. But I did this particular one, which was you get a piece of sausage and you put it in a rubber glove and you stick it in liquid nitrogen, and then get a hammer and hammer your finger, and the squeals of kind of from the girls about, you know, because it looks like your finger is smashed. And I got this card afterwards, and the 2 things a day which I always remember were, on the way out, they all lined up on the school and they kind of waved me, and I was driving away. It was like I was the Queen or something. Right? And then I got this card, which was amazing, because it was just from the girls there, and now they're all grown up. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of funny, and I just remember just certain things from that day. Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah.
Lads, thanks a million. We're going to have to actually wrap it up.
Yeah, sounds good.